So this is the case of just not good enough. And this probably is the one that we see where you don't really know if you should call. And then we get the call in March and it's like, wow, all the evaluations are good. Okay, so let's say that Mandy, hypothetically, is a third-year teacher whose evaluations, there's no doubt, you would rank as the bottom third on your staff. So you're not saying she's the worst teacher, but you also know this is the last year of the probationary period. Mm-hmm. She's nice, she's smart, she understands the material really well. It's never been a question of her competence with respect to like understanding and knowing the English curriculum. But the fact of the matter is she's never been able to control the room. The high school kids run all over her. And her AP and honors classes go pretty well. Generally speaking, well-behaved kids who are doing the homework and trying hard. But she's really struggling with all of her classes that aren't either AP or honors. You have parents on both sides of the issue. And in fact, you have recent graduates that are on both sides of the issue. You've had this teacher, right? Some think is the best teacher in the world. Every teacher's helped somebody, but you've got some kids who especially were high-performing kids where she was able to meet them intellectually on their level, and especially in some of these advanced classes. And you've got parents, though, that have come in and said, my kid's struggling. She doesn't stop to differentiate. It's just not going well for my kid. So you're in the second semester of her third year, and you start going, maybe you call a school lawyer and you start going through evaluations. 10% of her evaluations are exceeds district expectations for things like mastery of the subject area and those sorts of things. 75% of all of the categories you've ranked over the last 6 evaluations are meets expectations. 10% is needs improvement. So needs improvement, you know, you're going to say, well, clearly, I told her, I really hammered her on this one, Karen. I put needs improvement. But when we go through and look at it, only 4 of the evaluations have you, or only 4 categories of the however many domains you've had, have you ever actually said that you're not meeting expectations and district standards in these cases? So the superintendent's been pushing for things like cultural improvement. It's just not, and it's making a difference in the school. There have been several teachers who have been sort of gently nudged out by the superintendent because the superintendent's trying to do things differently and improve things like test scores. So the superintendent comes into your office, closes the door, and sits down and says, Mandy's just not good enough to be an Eagle. We put Eagle in there. I don't care if it's Duke, Cardinal, whatever it is. But this is the case that we call just not good enough to be a
And let me just throw a footnote out here. If you can't imagine your school district having somebody that's not good enough to be an Eagle, then I think you should have these cases, right? I think it is 100% acceptable to say she is not so incompetent no school would ever hire her. She's not good enough for us. And I think I want to affirm that that is the kind of administration I think makes Nebraska schools better than other schools. So
yeah, definitely. And so the bottom line is, let's say that you're either a newer principal or even if you've been doing this for a while, you're sitting there thinking, well, that's easy for you to say, Mr. or Ms. Superintendent, but it's my evaluations that are going to be on the line here. It's me who's going to have to answer these questions about why they were so good if she was clearly so bad that we had to fire her and force her and her family to move and sell her house, and you can see it develop. So the superintendent says, all right, well, to the extent I wasn't clear, I think we have to non-renew Mandy. So if you want to switch to the statute real quick, this is the part that Steve was talking about. Any reason, so long as it is constitutionally permissible. So in other words, if your basis for non-renewal is anything but unconstitutional, it's lawful. They write it in a sort of a confusing way, but although you still have to have some rational basis for making your decision, it can't just be completely arbitrary. I don't like that she wears blue shirts.
I believe you can say, I don't like that she wears blue shirts. I think that's arbitrary, but I think you can say she only wore Eagle gear 3 Fridays out of all football season.
Yep.
That's permissible.
Think back to what the statute actually says about non-renewal. If you go back and look at it, their chance to show up and present their side, right? The statute wasn't contemplating this big back and forth with cross-examinations about whether you knew Rule 10 or not. The statute's contemplating y'all show up and give your pitch to the board,
yep,
and the board decides if Mandy's good enough to be a Cardinal or not, right? And so that's why we sort of step back sometimes in these cases and say, okay, what does the non-renewal statute actually say? How did they envision this process playing out? And although the hearing will be more formal, there's a reason that it says any reason so long as it's not unconstitutional. So the question of who issues the notice comes up a lot in these cases, or what if you disagree with the superintendent? The fact of the matter is, the statute says, although it doesn't, I think the way the statute should be read is the school board can issue a notice to a superintendent, but the superintendent or superintendent's designee are the one that issue the notice to the affected certificated employee if it's a teacher. So if the superintendent says to you as a principal, you're going to issue a notice, it's difficult to think about how to process that case, but the statute would allow the superintendent to issue the notice even if you didn't. So I think having clear communications about your concerns with the case with your superintendent is a much better choice than saying, I disagree with you for you professionally, but this is what the statute says. The superintendent can issue it even if they're not the evaluating administrator.
So go back up.
Yep.
So the superintendent must deliver it unless the board has formally designated or there's some paper that says somebody else can issue it. We've had this happen where the principal or the HR person in central office issued it, and we need some kind of written document that shows they are the designee. When in doubt, have the superintendent issue the notice.
Okay, so let's say that Mandy does, you go through, you include the things that you're required to include in your notice of non-renewal, which again, is not much. You don't have to give Mandy, unlike a cancellation or termination, a big list of all the stuff. You just have to say that the board's going to consider a non-renewal of your contract. So Mandy gets that. Mandy requests a hearing. In preparation of the hearing, you're working with the school's lawyer as you get ready. You read all the evaluations. You read the rest of the personnel file. If we're prepping you, and I'm sure your school lawyer would too, if you don't work with KSB, is going to have you look at things like your evaluation policy, make sure that the correct instrument was on file with NDE, make sure you use the correct policy, look through Rule 10, right? We're going to force you essentially to remind yourself of all those things that you're expected to know as an expert in evaluation. So you're there at the hearing, you feel pretty confident. Earlier that morning, we went over your testimony and you're ready to roll. And then all of a sudden you see the NSCA start to cross-examine the witnesses that go before you. And you're thinking, wow, that's a lawyer on the other side who is here, and maybe their sole purpose. I've had this hearing, everybody's had this hearing. The sole purpose is the teacher says, I don't care if I get fired, I want you to make that principal look bad. That is a lawful reason for them to hold the hearing. They don't have to tell you why they're doing it, but you're sitting there getting a little bit nervous as the examination begins. So what will typically happen is we would call you and we would go through your examination. We'd walk through how you're an expert. If there were glaring holes or weaknesses in the case, we'd try to cover those on the front end, give you a chance to explain it before you get hit with the cross-examination question. But inevitably, we're going to say, okay, that's all we have. And you're sitting there and the union lawyers to your right, and now you've got to start answering their questions. So we're putting these up here not to scare you into never having a non-renewal hearing, even for a not good enough type of case, but just to tell you that as you're documenting things some random September afternoon, it's a good idea to know and at least have in the back of your mind what that document would look like in a hearing. So questions that we've heard or tactics that we've heard from the NSCA. So number one, are you the administrator certificated to perform Mandy's evaluation? Seems like an innocuous question. Yes, of course I am. You hold the right credentials from NDE? Absolutely. Did you evaluate her? Yep. Explain the requirements of your evaluation policy to the board. If that flush comes over your face, it's because you clearly have not read your evaluation policy in preparation of the hearing. Now, as you sit there today, could you explain it? How would you answer this question, especially as a principal? Even as a superintendent, right? Superintendent, you're going to go on after the principal and answer similar sort of questions and sprinkle the magic blessing of the chief administrator on the principal's actions here.
So things like, we use Danielson, we use Marzano. That's not enough, right? You're going to have to say, Robert Marzano has done research on classroom instruction across thousands of school districts, and he has distilled, I think it's 64 specific elements that show effective instruction. And so our policy takes those 64 and bundles them up into like 10 domains or whatever it is. That's the kind of stuff we want you to be able to say. It's not hard. You can do it. I mean, I know you can do it because when you've had a couple of drinks at administrators' days, you say this kind of stuff. You just have to be ready to say it in a professional manner in front of the board.
And that's why I in particular started to add a lot more of this to the prep. So you might be thinking, holy crap, I must have missed something. Why on earth would this union lawyer be making me go through the evaluation policy if I missed something?
That's right. It is a way to rattle you.
They are not they don't necessarily have anything that you've done wrong. They're just trying to get you to start questioning yourself. So reviewing that beforehand and understanding, maybe they add to this, so you owed this teacher 6 evaluations, isn't that right? That again, they might be asking that to freak you out. Now
but
you're
don't
like,
answer that question. Yes?
Exactly.
Karen and I have had a couple of hearings together where they start to go down this road and we look at each other going, what are they doing? And, are they going to get something out of this policy? And then they ask this question and kind of go, aha. And we look at each other and go, hey, you proved the sky is blue. Congratulations.
Right.
It happens.
All the time.
Why they do it, I don't know.
Yep.
It doesn't make much sense to us. So just Answer the questions that are asked and don't worry about it.
Yeah, absolutely. One more small point to make here. We're not here to rail on Danielson or Marzano or NDE's form documents or their form policies for evaluation. I get that the purpose, our statutes make clear that the purpose is for you to help improve struggling teachers. The more that's in that policy that you have to do, the more it is possible that there's a step in there that you could have missed. But again, that's part of the prep phase. So answer the questions confidently. Now, what if you do that really well and they say, okay, so you're an expert in evaluation, explain to me the requirements of Rule 10. Well, the reason we put the statute, the Rule 10 or the rule sections in there is it's not so much to master if you read through it 20 minutes, and in preparation for the hearing. So we're going to help you do that. Okay, and so then they start to attack the individual aspects of it. So you ranked, Mandy, 120 separate times in these documents, right? So maybe this is what they're setting you up for. Let me see, 6 times, yes, I did. 20 in each, yep, I sure did. And only 4 out of 120 times you said she fell below district standards. You need to be thinking about, yes, that's absolutely true. That was 4 too many. Or whatever your answer is going to be, they're going to start looking at stuff like that. So again, we'll help you through it.
And I've started, go back one.
Yeah.
I've started seeing, especially in the element heavy, Danielson and Marzano, I've started seeing districts include in their board policy that no one of these is particularly important. There's no ratio of good to bad. There's no tipping point. Kind of that basically says the administrator gets to say which one of these is most important in any given case, which I kind of like that language, and I've highlighted it in the policy of a hearing I'm getting ready to go to for that very reason.
Yeah. One of the things that I had happen last spring, and we ended up able to work it out, but was in the evaluation policy, the administrators clearly used the right instrument. They had the right policy on file, but it said any time you mark does not meet expectations, you're required to move into level 1, unless it's so bad that you have to move into level 2. And then if they don't exceed, you have to move into level 3, and then walk through the candy cane forest, and then you can fire them, right? So the teacher in that particular case had never been given an improvement plan because it was truly in only 4 out of all the 6 documents that she'd ever been given as evaluations. Only 4 of those domains were ever below standards. And of course, it had flowery crap in there about, we really wish you would improve here. You're doing great in other areas, but this is one where you really struggle. It did not make it seem like it was a significant deal. And so number one, we can explain that away. But if you have a policy that says you'll remediate them with a plan if they ever have a does not meet, and that's not in the paper, we're going to tell you that that's a way for them to challenge at this hearing, even if she's not good enough to be a cardinal. Another series of tactics. How many other teachers are below district standards? So as part of the prep for these, we've all started to process through the fact that the NSEA can talk to its other members and say, how many of you are on plans? Have you ever put any other teachers on an improvement plan? Well, sure I have. Did you ever put Mandy on an improvement plan? Well, no. Why not? Doesn't she deserve your best efforts to improve her? Wouldn't you agree that an improvement plan is an increase? So these sorts of gotcha, why didn't you do this? This is part of what we're talking about. Trust yourself, trust your processes, but understand if you're sitting there thinking, or you're talking to the lawyer, in March of the 3rd year of the teacher, do we have this? We're going to ask you these questions, not because we think you did anything wrong, because the union's going to. So in summary here, it's the NSGA's job to create doubt. Chad Meisgeier, who we really like, told me I really like Chad. Oh, you got it. Okay, yeah, there we go. Sorry, you got the cartoon there. It's the NSCA's job to sow doubt in what it is that you're doing. There's a flaw in every case. I think if you asked Scott Norby or Nick Welding or any other lawyer that's ever represented teachers or Trish Guinan in these cases, they'll say, and it's true, every case has some sort of flaw or something in there where we can start to poke holes in it. That doesn't make it unlawful. You don't have a beyond a reasonable doubt standard like you would in criminal court. Your professional judgment is entitled to deference, but you need to remember it's their job to make you look bad. Don't be afraid to ask help from legal counsel in reviewing plans. This is why, right? You know the NSCA is going to pull out tactics like this. This is why we've stopped caring if they ask if you sought legal counsel to help prepare these documents. And remember the standard, it's not that you have to be perfect, it's that we have to have some reason that isn't unconstitutional. So when you have these just not good enough cases, don't be afraid to say that teacher, although is not the worst teacher we have, is not good enough for our kids, because the legal standard says what it says.
So just a quick note about getting crossed. There's 2 extremes, and I don't want you to go to either one. One is the pause up, please just don't hurt me anymore. I'll admit whatever you tell me to admit. That's where I try to get all my witnesses. Just make the bad lady stop asking me questions. So if you're getting hammered, you've got to keep your what do I want to say, your dukes up. Don't just give up. I don't see administrators doing that as often as I do teachers. But the other extreme is to look like an a-hole. Yep, that's what it says. No, I don't think she needed a plan. It's good enough. Good enough. You want to look like Dudley Trueheart. Well, I considered putting Mandy on a plan, but really her issues were more about her innate abilities to form relationships with kids who struggle. And since here, all of our Eagles are excellent kids, but we do have a lot of families that come from difficult socioeconomic circumstances. So I don't know that a plan was really the right thing for Mandy as much as it is letting Mandy go someplace where she can find success in a community where she's going to connect better. That's way better than looking like a tool, right? And so, but you got to just constantly you cannot check out and get mad. And the only time I don't object very often during personnel hearings, if I'm objecting a lot, it means either I think you're getting mad and you need a chance to catch a break, or I want to make some point to the other lawyer. But you've got to keep your brain engaged the whole time.
And we put this up there, and that's a great point. The whole purpose of this section is, we've already covered the non-renewal stuff, right? It's to tell you that the NSEA's purpose. Every time you're writing every evaluation instrument you do, we wish at some point in the back of your mind it was, okay, so let me think about how this is going to look in a hearing.
Look at everything backwards.
Once you've been through a hearing, I think that probably makes sense. If you ask anybody who has, they will tell you it changed how they documented.
I think this is also why if there is a personnel hearing within 150, 200 miles of you, you should go. I think every administrator should go and watch one of these things, because we can explain it till we're blue in the face. Until you see it, it's just hard to understand.
And the more you see, the more you learn. I mean, we're 20 years in, and we still learn something from each hearing and from interacting with the various people that are involved in a hearing. So it's a tremendous learning experience.
It also makes you, I think, less afraid to go.
Yes.
Yep.
So, okay, so what are we going to do if we have it?
Well, that's it. It's your choice, right? We don't have like, okay, what are your options? Your options are to let her get tenure or to non-renew her. And so to some extent.
And I have never once had an administrator call and say, you know what, Karen, we were considering non-renewing. We are so glad she got tenure because she's way better now that she knows she can't be fired as easily. I've never once had that happen.